I'm going to start today off with a question, because I want to know, when is the last time you bought a music CD like this one? In fact, this isn't actually a music CD. This is a CD that my internet provider sent me to set up my router. Seriously? For the millennials watching this video, a compact disc was a thing that had songs on it. Yep, before the internet era, if you wanted to listen to music, you actually had to buy it. There was this thing called a record shop, and there was a CD or a cassette tape, and these things could cost up to $30. I know, it all seems pretty bizarre these days going to a physical store to purchase music. In less than 20 years, record sales have almost disappeared. In the year 2000, more than 900 million CDs were sold in America alone. 18 years later, this number has dropped to just 90 million. That's less than a tenth of what it used to be. The reason, of course, is internet downloads. Platforms like Napster, Emule, and torrents have completely changed the industry. And of course, you might think in this situation, record labels must be going totally bankrupt, right? Well, I mean, actually, the opposite is true. Check this out.
Universal Music Group turned over an average of $17.5 million per day in 2017, as the company's annual sales hit record highs, topping $6 billion.
And this is just one example. Other music companies like Sony Music or Warner are in a similar situation. Absolutely record profits. And in case you were wondering, the answer is no. Streaming platforms like Pandora, Deezer, and of course Spotify are not enough to explain this phenomenon. For example, Taylor Swift is one of the world's most famous artists, and she now hardly even makes $400,000 a year from her Spotify listens. Now, this might seem like a lot, but believe me, it is absolute pennies compared with the mega money that Michael Jackson made from the sales of Thriller. So why are record labels making so much money? How could they even survive all the illegal internet downloads and file-sharing platforms like Napster and Emule? Well, today we're going to answer these questions, but before we do, let's take a look back at the history.
Creative destruction.
In the year 1935, the Union of American Musicians published this statement.
Records are multiplied and duplicated by the thousands, and then sold to and used in places where otherwise musicians would be employed.
According to this union, more than 8,000 professional musicians had lost their jobs because of the so-called jukeboxes. A jukebox, for those who don't know, is a big record player that sits in a bar or restaurant. You can insert a coin and choose a song that you want. By the year 1935, more than 135,000 machines like this one were sold throughout the United States. But at the same time that those 8,000 traditional musicians were taken out of business, Benny Goodman was signing a $1 million contract with a label called RCA Victor. The business model of the music industry had already changed forever. Prior to this, musicians lived off the money they made from concerts. In fact, the first music records were used as advertising for the live performances. But now, 90% of their income was coming from record sales. This is a process which we call creative destruction. But this was more than an economic shift. The way we listen to music changed forever as well. All of a sudden, some local music genres started being enjoyed nationwide. For example, jazz music was a typical genre in New Orleans, but it ended up expanding all over America. And not only that, this also changed the way that we understood music. Think about it. Before we could record music, musicians could only do live performances. Their maximum audience was just a few hundred people. Suddenly, radios and records allowed them to reach millions. And this way, they made a whole lot more money. This is how a new genre was created, a musical style made for radio, and that's, of course, rock and roll. This is a style of music that originated in America and ended up expanding to all parts of the West, from Los Angeles to Berlin. Rock stars were no longer just simple artists, they were engines inside of a complex machine. The record label paid for marketing campaigns, organized massive concerts, and even negotiated advertising deals for them. Meanwhile, the rock star gave the whole industry a young and fresh face. And this is why, while artists like Elvis and the Beatles became millionaires, the big companies, they just got bigger and bigger. Since their music was not just listened to all across the developed world, a record like Michael Jackson's Thriller could sell more than 66 million copies in a brand new market that stretched from LA to Tokyo. By the year 1999, the music industry had reached its ceiling. More than 1,200 million records had been sold. The business was bigger than the GDP of a country like the Dominican Republic. And what happens when an industry generates so much money? Well, the big guys start eating the small ones. For a better understanding, in that moment, 78% of the industry was concentrated in just 5 big multinationals. And then, when the music industry was the ultimate money-making machine, something rather surprising happened. Remember that thing I said about creative destruction? Well, if there's one good example of positive destruction, it's Napster. Napster was the first software that allowed users to download songs in MP3 format in a fast, free, and of course illegal way. From one day to the next, those records that could cost $30 could be found for free online. And as you can see on this chart, this was the beginning of the end. Even though Napster lost a case in the courts, it was already too late. The music business had already changed forever. At the end of the day, why would you buy something if you can get it for free? But just hold on a minute here, because have a look at the chart again. If you pay attention, you'll see that despite a dramatic decline in record sales, the profit for companies like Universal Music Group hasn't actually changed that much. Why? Well, let's explain that right now.
Size matters.
Do you remember those 8,000 musicians that lost their jobs in 1935? Well, in the year 2000, something similar happened. Universal Music fired 4,000 people practically overnight. This was 34% of their staff. At this point, record sales were almost 90% of their income. And those sales, they were falling by 20% year after year. And this moment is when the executives of the big record labels started singing the same old tune that we've been talking about over and over again in this video, and of course, creative destruction. If they wanted to survive, they had to make a 180-degree shift to the company. They had to stop being a record label and start becoming a music label. Oh, okay, but, what does that actually mean? Well, let's have a look at the example of Universal Music Group. The first step for creative destruction is, of course, destruction. In the first decade of the 21st century, Universal got rid of everything that was not making it any money. What was that? Well, that would be the record manufacturing factories. They sold as many of those things as possible. And what's next up in creative destruction? Well, of course, that's creativity. With all the money they got from selling the factories, Universal bought all the music labels they possibly could. The main goal was to expand their music catalog as much as possible, which explains news like this.
Universal Music Group purchases EMI Music. Label Group will acquire catalogs of the Beatles, Pink Floyd, Radiohead, and more.
So what happens after some creative destruction like this? Well, tastes in musical genres, they change. For example, we have K-pop with songs like Gangnam Style. This was a popular genre in South Korea that ended up expanding to the rest of the world. Yep, dear viewers, in the 1930s the music industry was limited to the United States, then in the 80s it had expanded throughout the West, now in the 2000s music is a 100% global industry, and companies like Universal have bought labels in every market you can imagine.
Universal Music signs 10-cent deal for China expansion. Universal Music Group to relaunch EMI Records in India. Universal buys majority stake in Kenyan label AI Records.
And now you might wonder, okay, but no matter how many labels you buy, if people don't buy music anymore, your income's going to fall inevitably, right? Well, yeah, you are right. In fact, the music industry today is nothing but a shadow of what it used to be. So, well, what's the difference? Well, now, despite the cake being smaller, there are way less people eating. As you can see on the chart, 72% of the industry is covered by three big multinationals: Universal, Sony Music, and Warner. And yes, now is when we start talking about Spotify. As we said before, Spotify gives very little money to the artists. 1 million listens only means about $7,000. But when you have the rights of 25% of the music produced in the world, even if you make only $0.006 per listen, you still become a millionaire. Today, record sales, they've gone from being 90% of the industry's profit to just 25%. And streaming music represents 6 out of every $10 entering the music industry. Of course, this is great news for multinational corporations which make more and more money, but as you can imagine, this is not so good news for the musicians. It's harder and harder to make money with music, and this is why you need to be extremely popular to make any money out of this. On the other hand, those three big labels aren't willing to risk what they have by experimenting with new formulas. But wait a minute, because this is not so bad. If you've been following the news in the music industry lately, you'll probably see that there's a bit more room for some creative destruction.
Spotify now lets artists bypass labels and upload their own music.
Yes, dear viewers, if you have a band, you can now upload your songs directly to Spotify and get your royalties without a middleman. Way! And by the way, if you do make good music and you want some free advertising, do send us your demos to info@visualpolitik.net and we can play it in the background of some of our videos. Of course, do remember to add a link to your YouTube channel. Meanwhile, the big question now is, will we witness the advent of a new creative destruction process in the music industry? Well, please leave your answer in the comment section below. Also, do visit reconsidermedia.com, the podcast that provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. And don't forget, we publish brand new videos every week, so subscribe to this channel and hit the bell button so you won't miss any posts. And if you like this video, give us a thumbs up. And as always, I'll see you next time.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear more of my lovely voice, don't forget to check out the Reconsider podcast at reconsidermedia.com. Reconsider is a podcast that challenges you to reconsider your views by providing context, but we don't do the thinking for you.